He rode to collect a debt but found the woman who would burn, bleed, and save him instead. In the dying heat of the Arizona Territory, 1817, Ethan Carver, a cold, disciplined rancher, arrived at a broken shack to claim what was his. But when the drunken debtor shoved his own daughter, Clara Hart, into the sun and called her payment, something inside Ethan shifted. He didn't need her yet, he couldn't walk away. At his ranch, she worked in silence, endured whispers and cruel hands, until his small daughter, Lucy, reached out with innocent trust, binding their fates together. One night, when the barn caught fire, Clara dove through smoke and flame to save Lucy's life, her body scarred, but her heart unyielding. From that night on, Ethan could no longer hide behind pride or silence. But when Clara's father returned this time to sell her to a powerful merchant, Ethan must decide whether to fight for the woman he once took out of duty, or lose the only light that had ever touched his life. And in the end, under the burning sunset of the frontier, it won't be the debt that defines them, but the love that rose from its ashes. The Arizona Territory lay stretched beneath a sky that never seemed to end, an ocean of heat and dust, where even the wind felt dry enough to cut. A cluster of wooden buildings huddled at the edge of Dust Hollow, their roofs warped by sun and time. Beyond them, the land rolled wide and unforgiving. Golden grass bent low against the wind, cacti stood like sentinels, and the earth itself seemed to hum with old grief. Ethan Carver's ranch stood apart from the town, massive, orderly, and silent. The barns rose like fortresses of wood and sweat, their beams blackened by years of labor. Horses stamped in their pens, men's voices carried in rough bursts over the fields. Yet the house itself, grand though it was, felt hollow. Since his wife's death, Ethan's world had been built of routine and restraint. Every door he shut, every ledger he signed, was another wall around his heart. Then came the day he rode toward the Hart property, a forgotten patch of land that smelled of rot and whiskey. He had no idea that behind that splintered door waited the one thing he could neither buy nor bury, a girl with fire in her eyes and nothing left to lose. The moment he saw Clara Hart step into the sunlight, the air between them shifted like thunder before a storm. Ethan Carver dismounted before the shack, dust curling around his boots like restless ghosts. The sun blazed high, glaring off his hat brim, as he knocked once on the crooked door. From inside came a shuffle, a curse, and the sour reek of whiskey. Then Jacob Hart, a man hollowed by liquor and failure, appeared. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt torn, his pride long gone. "You're late on 6 months' interest," Ethan said evenly. His tone held no anger, only fact. "I'm here for what's owed." "Zut." Jacob laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "You'll get nothing. The land's dead. The mine's dry. You want your money? Take the dirt itself." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd dealt with liars, gamblers, desperate men before, but something about Hart's grin felt darker, crueler. "That's not how this works," Ethan said quietly. Jacob turned away, muttering, "Wait here." He vanished into the shadows of the house. Moments later, he returned not with silver, but dragging a young woman by the wrist. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the doorway. Her hair was tangled, her dress worn thin, her face pale but proud. "This one," Jacob said, smirking, 18 years of trouble. Worth more to you than to me. Take her, and call it even." Ethan's gaze flicked to the girl. She said nothing, but her eyes burned with humiliation and defiance both. And as the wind scraped dry across the porch, Ethan realized the debt he'd come to collect was about to cost him far more than gold ever could. Clara stood frozen on the porch, dust swirling at her bare feet. Her father's grip dug into her shoulder hard enough to bruise, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. The humiliation, the ache, the exhaustion, it had all become one dull ache that no slap could worsen. Ethan's voice came low, deliberate. "I didn't come for this." Jacob spat near his boots. "You came for payment. That's all I've got left to give." For a moment, the silence between them was thick enough to choke on. Ethan's eyes met the girl's storm against ember. Something in her stare held him. Something proud even in ruin. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "I am not for sale." Jacob's hand struck her face so fast the sound cracked like thunder. Clara stumbled but didn't cry out. The red mark bloomed on her cheek as she straightened again, staring at her father with all the hatred years of fear had forged. Ethan stepped forward before he could think. "That's enough." "My." Jacob turned, teeth bared, but stopped when he saw Ethan's hand resting near his revolver. No threat spoken, but the warning was there. Ethan's voice softened, somehow heavier. "Pack your things," he said to Clara. "You're coming with me." Her eyes widened, torn between disbelief and dread. "Why?" Ethan didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know himself. He only knew leaving her there would damn them both. The ride back to the ranch stretched long and silent. Clara sat stiffly in the wagon bed, clutching the small bundle she'd gathered: a faded shawl, a wooden comb, a Bible with missing pages. Ethan didn't look back once. The sun dropped behind the mesas, painting everything in bruised gold. When they reached the Carver ranch, night was falling. He led her to a narrow shack beside the stables. "You can stay here," he said. "You'll work for your keep, meals at dawn and sundown." "Nah." She nodded once, voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." Inside, the room was plain: a cot, a wash basin, and the smell of hay. But it was clean. She sat on the edge of the bed, the first real one she'd had in months, and stared at her hands until her vision blurred. For the first time that day, she let herself breathe. By morning, she was already at work. She scrubbed floors, washed linens, carried water from the well until her palms blistered. The ranch hands watched her with curiosity first, then mockery. "Pretty thing for a debtor's girl," one of them snickered. Another chuckled. "Wonder how the boss is paying himself back." She ignored them, tightening her grip on the bucket. But the whispers followed her everywhere: through the barn, through the cookhouse, through the long, heavy hours of labor. Only one person treated her kindly. A little girl with honey-colored hair and a quiet stare. Lucy Carver couldn't have been more than 4. She watched Clara from the stable door, clutching a small wooden horse. When their eyes met, Clara smiled faintly. "Hello." Lucy hesitated, then vanished behind the door. The next morning, there was a small apple left by the wash basin. Clara didn't need to guess who'd left it. Days bled into weeks. She worked without complaint, slept in exhaustion, and avoided the ranch hands who made her skin crawl. But one afternoon, as she reached for the well rope, a shadow blocked the Sunday. "Well now," drawled Boone, a thick-necked man who always smelled of whiskey. "Ain't you a sight out here alone?" Clara tensed. "I'm fetching water." He smirked. "I can help with that." When she tried to step around him, he moved closer. His fingers brushed her wrist. "You don't talk much, do you?" "Let go." He laughed softly. "You got fire, I'll give you that." The next second, his boot caught the hem of her skirt, trapping her in place. "Oops," he muttered. She stumbled to her knees in the dust, then froze at the sound of a voice behind them, sharp as a blade. "Get your boot off her skirt." Boone turned and his smirk died. Ethan stood a few feet away, one arm around Lucy, his face carved from stone. "Sir, I was just—" Ethan didn't let him finish. He crossed the distance and drove his fist into Boone's jaw. The man hit the ground hard, dust exploding around him. Ethan's gaze swept the others nearby. "Anyone else feel like testing where I draw the line?" Silence. He turned to Clara. She was still on her knees, breathing hard, confusion flickering in her eyes. Ethan offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm but careful, as if he feared she might break. "If anyone makes you feel unsafe," he said quietly, "including me, you tell me. You understand?" She nodded. "Yes. This is your home now." He left before she could answer. But those words stayed with her, echoing long after he'd gone. From that day on, the ranch changed in small, invisible ways. No one touched her again. No one whispered when she passed. Lucy began following her everywhere, helping feed the chickens, folding linens, watching the way Clara's hands moved gently through every task. At night, Ethan sometimes stood on the porch, watching the lamplight glow faintly from her window. The woman he had taken had brought something back to the place, something he'd thought gone forever. Weeks later, a storm rolled across the plains, wild, sudden, and cold. Rain hammered the tin roof, and wind howled through every crack. Clara stayed out too long hauling firewood, soaked to the bone by the time she returned. She said nothing, just changed, made dinner, and went to bed shivering. By dawn, her fever had set in. Lucy found her first curled under the blanket, pale and trembling. The little girl climbed onto the cot and tucked herself beside her. "I'll keep you warm," she whispered. When Ethan came in with medicine, he stopped at the doorway. The sight hit him like a bullet. His daughter asleep against Clara's shoulder, the woman's hand resting protectively over her back. He stood there, silent, then knelt beside the bed. He placed the pouch of medicine gently on the table. He'd seen his daughter sleep like that once before years ago, in her mother's arms. The fever broke 2 days later. Clara woke to sunlight spilling through the window. Lucy was drawing shapes in the dust near her bed, humming softly. Ethan appeared with a tray of broth. "You should have called for help," he said. "I didn't want to be trouble." "You're alive because my daughter doesn't listen," he said, setting the tray down. For the first time, there was warmth, faint, uncertain, but real in his voice. That night, as the house settled into quiet, he stood by her door. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For giving her back her smile." Time passed. Trust grew slow and careful, like dawn after a long storm. Clara and Lucy became inseparable. Their laughter returned to the house like rain to dry soil. But peace in the West was never meant to last. One afternoon, a knock shattered the calm. When Ethan opened the door, Jacob Hart stood on the porch, sober for once, wearing a sneer that felt rehearsed. "You've got something of mine," he said. "She's not yours anymore," Ethan replied. "Oh, come now," Jacob said, stepping forward. "A man in Prescott's willing to pay good money for her hand. Rich merchant. Clean house. You can't tell me she's worth more to you than that." Behind Ethan, Clara froze in the hall. The blood drained from her face. "I will not go," she said. Jacob's eyes narrowed. "You'll do what I say." "Always have." Ethan's voice cut through the air. "Not anymore." He stepped forward, forcing Jacob off the porch. "You come again," he said, "and I'll bury you where you stand." Jacob's smirk faltered. He left without another word. Clara stood trembling. Ethan turned to her and said simply, "You're safe." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. That night, the fire came. No one knew how it started, maybe a spark from the forge, maybe fate itself. Flames tore through the old barn before the alarm was even raised. Ethan was miles away, riding fence. Clara saw the glow first. She didn't think she ran. Inside the burning barn, Lucy was huddled in the hay, crying. Clara charged through the smoke, coughing, her dress catching flame as she reached the child. She wrapped Lucy in her arms, shielding her as the roof groaned overhead. They burst out into the dirt, Clara rolling to smother the fire along her side. The pain was white-hot, but Lucy was safe. When Ethan returned, the barn was ash, and Clara lay half-conscious by the porch. He knelt beside her, whispering her name. "You're hurt," he said. "She's safe," she murmured, her voice breaking. "That's all that matters." He washed her wounds himself that night, his hands trembling more than hers. "Why didn't you let someone else?" she began. "Because I couldn't," he said softly. "Because if I touch you, I might not stop." Their eyes met. No words after that, only the quiet rhythm of breathing, the unspoken truth settling between them like embers cooling after a storm. The next morning, Dust Hollow awoke to whispers. Jacob Hart had returned again, this time with a man from Prescott, a merchant with money and a hollow smile. They came to claim her like property, but Clara was no longer the girl from that shack. She stood tall before them, voice calm but unshakable. "I will not go with you. Not now, not ever." And as Ethan stood beside her, silent but certain, she realized whatever came next, this was her home. The morning after the fire, the air was heavy with smoke and whispers. The ranch hands worked in silence, hammering new beams where the barn once stood, but their eyes often drifted toward the house, toward her. Clara moved slower now, her right arm bandaged, every step a reminder of the flames. Still, she refused to rest. She milked the cows, fed the chickens, swept the porch. If anyone asked why, she said simply, "It helps me forget." Ethan watched from the window, torn between guilt and awe. He'd never known a woman who could face ruin and meet it with such quiet grace. He wanted to speak, to thank her, to tell her how the ranch felt alive again, but words failed him. Every time he looked at her, he felt something loosen inside, something he had spent years keeping locked away. That peace lasted 3 days. On the 4th, as the sun fell behind the hills, a knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find Jacob Hart, sober but smug, standing on the porch beside a stranger, a man dressed too fine for the frontier, his coat trimmed with gold thread, his mustache perfectly shaped. "I brought someone to see you," Jacob said. "Mr. Bernard Whitlock, from Prescott. He's got business and interest in something that belongs to me." Whitlock tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carver. I hear you've been housing Miss Hart. Her father tells me she's quite the worker. I'm in need of a wife. I'm prepared to settle the debt in full, and more for your cooperation." Ethan's hand tightened on the doorframe. He didn't speak. Behind him, Clara appeared in the hallway, her breath catching when she saw them. Her father's smirk deepened. "There she is. Girl, come say hello." Clara didn't move. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere." Whitlock chuckled politely. "Miss Hart, I can offer you a fine home, servants, dresses, comfort, something this ranch can't." "She's not for sale," Ethan said, his tone sharp enough to slice through the air. Jacob laughed, taking a step forward. "Don't make this a scene, Carver. You can't keep her. She's mine by blood, and she owes—" "She owes nothing," Ethan snapped, his voice low but deadly. Behind him, Lucy peeked around the corner, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Clara took a small step forward, instinctively shielding the child. Jacob's sneer faltered. "You think you're some kind of savior, don't you? You bought her once, you can sell her again." That was enough. Ethan's hand closed around the door, and with one swift motion, he slammed it in the man's face. The echo rattled through the house like gunfire. For a long moment, no one moved. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. Lucy clutched her hand. Ethan turned, his voice steady but soft. "He won't touch you again." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to let the words sink into the cracks of her fear, but she knew Jacob Hart. He wouldn't walk away so easily. That night, the ranch lay under a silver moon, the wind whispering through broken fences. Ethan sat alone at the table, papers spread before him, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of Clara's trembling hands, her defiant eyes, the way she'd run into the fire for his child. He poured a glass of whiskey, but it burned too much. He set it aside and stepped out onto the porch. There, beneath the faint glow of a lantern, stood Clara, staring out toward the dark fields. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "I can't sleep." He nodded. "Nor can I." Silence stretched between them, tense, unspoken, heavy with what neither dared to admit. Finally, Clara spoke. "When you came for that debt," she said, "did you ever think it would lead here?" "No," he said, "but I don't regret it." She turned, startled. "You don't regret taking me?" He shook his head. "If I hadn't, you'd be dead by now. Or worse." Clara swallowed, her eyes glistening. "And now?" Ethan took a step closer. The lantern light flickered across his face, softening the hard lines. "Now," he said, "I wonder who saved who." Before she could answer, Lucy's voice carried from the door. "Papa?" They turned. The little girl stood there in her nightdress, holding her stuffed horse. "Is she staying with us forever?" Ethan looked at Clara, their eyes locked, question and answer in one. "Yes," he said quietly. "If she'll have us, Mel." Lucy smiled, satisfied, and padded back inside. By dawn, word had spread. The merchant, furious at being turned away, had gone to the sheriff. He accused Ethan of harboring stolen property. Jacob Hart added fuel to the fire, claiming Ethan had taken his daughter against her will. By midday, half the town was whispering. When Ethan rode into Dust Hollow for supplies, heads turned, voices hissed behind hands. A few men he'd done business with refused to meet his eye. By the time he returned home, Clara knew. She saw it in his face, the look of a man preparing for battle. "I won't let them shame you," she said. "They already have," he replied. "But shame doesn't kill. Silence does." That night, as thunder gathered on the horizon, Ethan saddled his horse again. "Where are you going?" Clara asked. To end this, he said, if they want truth, they'll hear it from me. The next morning, Dust Hollow's main street buzzed with noise. The weekly market was in full swing, barrels of grain, bolts of cloth, the smell of roasted corn and horse sweat. Then Ethan Carver rode in, dismounted, and climbed the steps of the town hall porch. Listen, his voice rang out. The chatter dimmed. I've got something to say. Dozens turned to look. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped tight. Lucy clung to her skirts. Ethan's eyes swept over them all. 6 months ago, James Hart came to me owing money he couldn't pay. What he offered in return was not land nor cattle, but his daughter. A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. I took her in, he continued, because I couldn't stomach what he was doing. She came to my house as property, but she became the reason it feels like home again. He turned, meeting Clara's eyes across the square. She gave my daughter laughter. She gave my soul peace. And for that, she owes me nothing. I release every debt tied to the Hart name. I want nothing from that man except for him to stay gone. The murmurs grew louder. Some were outraged. Some moved to silence. And as for Clara Hart, he said, voice deepening, she is not my servant, not my property, not my redemption. She is part of my family if she chooses it. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Then a small, clear voice rose above the noise. Please stay with us. It was Lucy. She had slipped through the crowd, clutching Clara's hand. Clara's throat tightened. She looked down at the little girl's tear-streaked face, and then at Ethan, standing before the whole town, unarmed but unafraid. Trembling, she stepped forward. All my life, she began, her voice barely above the wind, I've been spoken for, used, traded, shamed. But here, she glanced at Lucy, then at Ethan, I was seen. She took a breath, her voice growing stronger. I was not chosen before, but today, I choose. She met Ethan's eyes and said it so softly, yet so fiercely, the whole street went still. I choose to stay. The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was reverence. The sheriff lowered his hat. The crowd parted. For the first time, no one looked at Clara with pity. They looked at her with respect. And for Ethan Carver, the man who'd once come to collect a debt, that was the only payment he'd ever need. But as they rode home through the fading light, Clara sensed something in him still unsettled, a restlessness, like a storm not yet past. What's wrong? She asked. He glanced at her, his jaw tight. Nothing, just thinking how long it took me to find peace, and how I'd burn the world down before I lose it again. Clara reached over, her fingers brushing his. You won't. He looked down at their joined hands, the setting sun bleeding gold across the land. No, he said quietly, I won't. And somewhere far behind them, the wind carried away the last ashes of the past. The evening sun hung low, spilling amber light across the wide plains as the wagon creaked its way back toward the Carver ranch. The wind had softened, carrying with it the scent of rain and mesquite. Behind them, the town of Dust Hollow faded into a blur of memory and whispers left behind. Clara sat beside Ethan in the wagon, her fingers folded tightly in her lap. Lucy slept in the back, her small hands curled around her stuffed horse, her breath even and soft. For the first time in a long while, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full, like something waiting to be said. When the ranch came into view, its rebuilt barn glowing faintly in the twilight, Clara felt the tears rise without warning. She turned away quickly, brushing her face with the back of her hand. Ethan noticed. You all right? Yes, she said, her voice unsteady. It's just. I never thought I'd see this place again. Not like this. He slowed the horses, eyes fixed on the horizon. Neither did I. When I first brought you here, I thought I was settling a debt. Instead, I started something I can't undo. She turned toward him, heart thudding. And what's that? He looked at her, then really looked, and the words came out rough, like gravel breaking loose after years of silence. Caring again. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sun sank lower, the sky turning molten red behind the hills. Clara's throat ached. You don't have to say that because of what I did, she whispered. I'm saying it because of who you are, he said. You walked into fire for my child. You stood up to every man who tried to own you, including me. You could have left, but you stayed." Clara's voice trembled. "Because for once in my life I was seen." Ethan reached out, his rough hand finding hers. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, the same place Boone had once grabbed, but this touch carried no demand, only truth. "Then see me now," he said softly. "Not as the man who took you, as the man who finally knows he can't let you go." Her breath caught. The wind stilled. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to smile, not out of politeness or gratitude, but from something real, warm, dangerous in its beauty. "I don't want to go anywhere," she said. The horses slowed to a stop in front of the house. The lantern by the door flickered to life, as if the night itself welcomed them home. Lucy stirred in the back, murmuring, "Mama," in her sleep. Clara froze. The words slipped through the dusk like a prayer. Ethan turned to her, voice quiet. "She's been calling you that in her dreams for weeks." Tears blurred Clara's vision. "She shouldn't." "She should," he interrupted gently. "You've earned it." Clara's composure broke then. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, trying to stifle the sob rising in her chest. Ethan reached for her, pulling her close, the weight of months of silence collapsing into one tender, certain embrace. "Stay," he murmured against her hair. "Not because I ask you to, because you want to." "I already did," she whispered. They stayed like that until the sun vanished, until the stars began to spill across the desert sky. When they finally stepped down from the wagon, Lucy woke, blinking sleepily. "Are we home?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We're home." That. Lucy stretched her arms toward Clara, who lifted her without hesitation. The little girl nestled her head against her shoulder and sighed. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" Clara laughed softly, her voice breaking through the night like music. "Yes, baby, we can have pancakes." Ethan watched them, mother, daughter, light, and something inside him finally settled. The wind rose again, gentle and cool, carrying the scent of rain and cedar across the open plains. The ranch no longer felt hollow. The silence no longer hurt. And as Ethan looked at the two souls who had turned his world from dusk to dawn, he understood what love truly meant on the frontier, not the taking, not the saving, but the choosing. That night, as firelight danced across the walls, Clara lay awake listening to the rain begin to fall. It was soft at first, then steadier, like the earth itself was exhaling. She rose quietly, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. The fields shimmered under the storm, silver and endless. Ethan joined her moments later, barefoot, silent, his presence warm beside her. "It's raining," she whispered. He nodded. "First good rain in months." "No." Clara tilted her face toward the sky, eyes closed. "Maybe it's washing the old things away." Ethan reached out, his hand brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "Then let it." She turned to him, and this time, she didn't hesitate. The kiss came slow, certain, unhurried, a promise sealed under thunder and rain. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled through tears. "So this is what freedom feels like." Ethan smiled back, voice low. "No, Clara, this is what home feels like." This. And as the storm rolled across the land, the ranch that had once been built on debts and silence became a place reborn where fire had taken, rain restored, and two lost hearts had found their way back to life. Months passed, and the Arizona plains began to bloom again. Spring crept softly across the land, the mesquite turned green, wildflowers dotted the hillsides, and the smell of rain lingered in the air long after the storms had gone. The Carver ranch, once scarred by fire and silence, now pulsed with life. The new barn stood taller than before, the fences gleamed with fresh paint, and laughter drifted through the yard like a hymn. Lucy's giggles carried across the wind as she ran with the ranch dog through the tall grass, her curls catching sunlight like threads of gold. Clara watched from the porch, her bandaged arm long-healed, a basket of folded laundry beside her. The woman who had once arrived here barefoot and broken now stood tall, her face calm and sure. She no longer flinched at the sound of men's boots or thunder. The fear had burned away with the old barn, leaving only strength and peace. Ethan came up behind her, wiping dust from his hands. "You know," he said, half smiling, The men say the house feels lighter these days. Clara looked over her shoulder, teasing. You sure it's not just because you finally fixed that leaky roof? He chuckled, low and warm. Maybe, but I think it's something else. He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers, the smallest of touches, yet full of certainty. You did that, Clara. You gave this place back its soul. Lef. She met his gaze, eyes glistening. No, she whispered. We did. At the edge of the yard, Lucy called, Mama, come see. She was building something, a small corral made of sticks and stones, her version of the ranch in miniature. Clara smiled. Go on ahead, Ethan said, his voice thick with quiet pride. She crossed the yard toward the child, her skirt sweeping through the wildflowers. Lucy threw her arms around her waist, laughing. The dog barked, the horses neighed in the distance, and the evening wind rose, carrying with it the sweet scent of dust and freedom. Ethan stood on the porch, watching them. The sun dipped low, setting the horizon ablaze in gold and rose. For a moment, he closed his eyes and breathed in the peace he'd thought he'd never earn. When he opened them again, Clara was looking back at him, her smile soft and knowing. Under that vast western sky, 3 lives once shattered by debt and loss had become something new, bound not by obligation, but by choice. And as the last light faded behind the hills, Ethan Carver tipped his hat toward the woman and child who had saved him, whispering to the wind, Some debts are meant to be forgiven. Some are meant to be loved.